Good.
All right. Fantastic. I think that we can start this wonderful session.
Yeah, I agree. Perhaps as we agreed yesterday, Mirko, perhaps I start with some welcome words. I will be brief, and as I also said yesterday, it's not about the making a welcome speech like Dean or something, let's say, very institutional, but no, actually, what is needed is, of course, a short presentation while we are sitting here. Standing, of course, not standing, not sitting in front of the computer, and have a very, hopefully, and I believe so, interesting talk about a very also uncommon topic, I believe. My name is Andreas Sicklinger. I'm a full professor at the University of Bologna, and I'm part of the research team, which is trying to build up this, I believe, new field of ergonomics. I think it comes from a little bit that side. Of course, there is a lot of other, as usual, fields involved, but let's say the initiators, Professor Michele Zannoni, also online, and myself come from this field, thinking that there is something new also going on, and also based on the publication of Professor Flaviano Celarski, who is, let's say, also founder of our design courses, who actually wrote the book Human Design Human Body Design. Sorry. Gives us this opening to this new field, talking about the human body also as a subject of design interest. And it's not just now, it's actually since almost ever. Again, human beings are trying to perform better, to make life easier. And of course, the starting point is the body itself. Through medicine, of course, we improve and we live longer and so on. So that's definitely a very specific field, and we are not interested now to, let's say, take pieces or merits from this field, but it's about the discussion of how design is interacting with the human body and improving, changing performance, rehabilitation, and even medicine is looking for better design approaches, because in many fields, the aesthetics of a medical intervention, a surgery, and so on are very, very important. It's not just, let's say, I do it and you continue living. No, it should be at least at the same level like it was before, if not better. From there starting, then, of course, we go to a huge, big field of wearable devices and attachments and data controlling of body's well-being. It's an enormous world. So last year, Michele Zannoni organized a symposium in order also to put together researchers related to this field, and we collected a lot of interesting case studies and data. This project is not finished, and this is the reason why we are here today. It can't be finished, and it would be a pity starting with something so much important and then just put it in a drawer. Therefore, today, a little bit also the other bodies, and or how can I say, post bodies, behind bodies, future bodies. There's a lot of bodies. I would like to welcome Mirko Daneluzzo, who is a visiting professor from the Dubai Institute for Design and Innovation. We invited him for 1 month to help us with his own vision and connections and ideas to help us in our research. And as a, let's say, final outcome, as a, let's say, almost farewell message today, the talk with colleagues and designer artists, in order to give more input and, let's say again, more challenge to the same topic. Thank you very much. So also for our guests, Filippo, Gionata, and Andrea, and I give the word now to Mirko.
Thank you very much, Andreas. It's a pleasure for me actually to be here. I enjoyed a lot the collaboration that we are constructing, and I hope that it's going to be just again one piece now that we can taken and to develop further this discussion around the body, and that's something that it's very intriguing for me and exciting. And just a brief introduction by myself. As Andreas said, I'm a professor at the Dubai Institute of Design and Innovation in Dubai. I'm one of the co-founder professors, and in there I conduct courses in the foundation product and foundation program, and the product design concentration. And I'm also co-founder and head of design of Nixo, that is architecture and product design practice based in Dubai. We're trying to, transfer also or reconnect now with the reality, what we do, let's say, in terms of research as academics. I just want to say that yes, what we're trying to do with this conversation today is to expand a little bit the realm of understanding what does it mean to design for bodies or for the human body, in terms that the idea was to consider the post-digital conditions. So that includes AI, algorithms, robots, and all other entities, and what does it mean to interact with other bodies, and what does it mean for the human body to interact with others. So and let's say, taking this in consideration as a framework, I proposed, I invited these three marvelous designers. So as Andreas already mentioned, Filippo Nassetti, Andrea Macruz, and Gionata Gatto, to discuss around these topics. And I don't want to spend other words right now, because we are going to discuss at the, let's say, on the second part, so after their presentation. So we're going to have Filippo, Andrea, and Gionata that will present their work, their recent work and the researches, and then we're going to open up the discussion to build up and construct around those things. So I don't want I want directly to jump into their presentations, and so I'm pleased to actually share this stage, or give the stage to Filippo for the first presentation, and enjoy. Let's listen to him.
Thank you, Mirko. Thank you, Andreas. So let me begin by sharing the screen. As we jump in, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm quite excited because I love the topic, and also because I'm originally from Bologna. So I was born, raised, and I graduated there. And it's actually not that common to come back there now for work, and it's always quite emotional for me. Having said that, just a quick introduction of who I am, what I do. I started researching around 2012, working on the topic of bodies and computational design and the design of wearable products. So back then the focus was on 3D printing. So I started with a few projects working in that under the label MOX. MOX was and is a label that was co-founded by myself and Alessandro Zomparelli, and was focused specifically on generative design for the design of wearables and 3D printing. And then after that, throughout the years, it became more a label to also organize a set of projects dealing with this type of research. On top of that, I'm currently responsible for computational design at Zaha Hadid Design, and I'm a lecturer at UCL de Bartlett in London, where I live. Anyway, let's give the words to the projects. And my presentation starts by introducing another post. So I'm happy that there is a post-digital, but I would like to talk specifically of a post-natural today. And post-natural for me is an operational notion which I use to describe my work, describe the interest that I have and the direction into that. So post-natural can be defined as an ambiguity within contemporary notions of natural, artificial, human, non-human, cultural, technological, material, and digital, which is something which I think that it's not a definition that is meant to be completely original, but rather to describe something which has been going on in the world, in the type of reading of the world that we can do, and has been discussed by many philosophers and thinkers together with designers. So even though this quote here from Donna Haraway, I think it has almost 3 decades now, I think it's still pretty contemporary in describing certain sensibility. I want to signal 3 crucial boundary breakdowns. By the late 20th century, the boundary between human and animal is thoroughly breached. The last beachheads of uniqueness have been polluted, if not turned into amusement parks. Language, tool use, social behavior, mental events, nothing really convincingly settles the separation of human and animal. The second leaky distinction is between animal-human, organism, and machine. Last 20th century machines have made thoroughly ambiguous the difference between natural and artificial, mind and body, self-developing and externally designed, and many other distinctions they used to apply to organisms and machines. Our machines are disturbingly lively, and we ourselves frighteningly inert. The third distinction is a subset of the second. The boundary between physical and non-physical is very imprecise for us. So in time, my work at MOX, our work at MOX, and the research that followed try to situate itself into this territory. So we've been working on a number of projects through times, which I believe were engaging with discussing what does it mean to be nature, was something that is natural rather than artificial, physical rather than digital, and how these notions, which are traditionally thought as oppositions, as very solid constructs, are in fact very blurred, are in fact, and there are hybrid territories that can be explored by design, where things are not as clear as they seem. So our experience started in 2012 with a project named Collagen Masks, where the inspiration was a certain type of natural formation. So we were intrigued generally by fibrous formations and the type of relationship that they have with other type of bodies. So the fibrous body is something that has a parasitic relationship with other type of bodies, whether they are trees, whether they are temples, like in this image. And we were interested and we thought that there was a very strong space of expression here. So generally there is this idea of substrate and growth, and that's something that we wanted to express in a project and set the ground for describing a new type of relationship between body and technology. So the fibrous tissues we were looking at had this type of relationship with the substrate onto which they were growing. And at the same time, they had the fact that we were fascinated by the fact that the fibers could be seen as tissues, so continuous entities where you cannot distinguish one fiber from the other, but rather the whole thing really becomes a continuous tissue. So the way we approached this project was basically to set up a procedural software where it was possible to 3D scan people and have a set of tools to design and control this fibrous formation, and then automatically, procedurally, generatively bring them into 3D shapes that could smoothly be 3D printed. So we were working with a bundling algorithm, isosurfacing algorithms, and so on to create populations of curves, starting for a very few simple ones that then can be then turned quite smoothly into 3-dimensional shapes that could be then understood as fibrous systems. So this procedure led the designer to work generatively, so creating automatically through the software vast populations of outcomes that could then be selected almost in an evolutionary process, and then the design will happen that way. So eventually what we were interested was to find a way to redescribe technology and the relationship with the body. So the wearables can be seen as technological objects. And really, I think our interest was to try to redescribe the shape, the material, the look of technology. So we are used to an idea of technology which is strongly grounded on modernism and the development that there was. So mostly people would think of technology as something made of steel, made of glass, made of plastic, made of smooth, continuous shapes, all the type of imagination that we have that are rooted in modernism and the way in which we were envisioning the future in the 60s or the 70s. I believe that that's kind of a mainstream view of technology, but in fact, technology can also be something radically different. And the newest developments are actually showing that. So we are interested in thinking of technology as something biological, something where the distinction between natural and artificial and digital and material was in fact very blurred, and this project is actually exploring that. So how a technology can be something that has a parasitic relationship with the person, with the body, even in the way it looks, and how these objects, if you were to find them, it would be very hard to describe if they were of natural or artificial origin. So all these type of sensibilities were at the very root of this project here. So basically trying to imagine a different way in which technology can interact with our bodies, and a radical different way to imagine the prosthesis that extend our body and transform it. So this project set the ground. It was our first project dealing with the body, and then it set the ground for a number of other ones to follow, which were exploring slightly different things. So what we're seeing here are microscope images of the shells of insects and crustaceans, what is named the carapax or carapace in Italian, which is also the title of this research. And the project started by simulating the formation of such structure in a generative way. So how you can control a computational simulation that is output in this type of shapes, which are characterized by the fact that you have changes in densities, changes in porosity, and that allows you to control at the same time the strength, the stiffness of the object in certain parts, and the possibility to see through, and the lightness eventually of the object. So how can you can deliver structural strength while keeping lightness and minimizing the weight of the product, and how that is being enabled by technologies such as 3D printing. Again, this project is situated again around 2014, 15, so it was really a time where there was a lot of exploration on the possibilities of 3D printing, and definitely that was one of the goals of the project. So in this sense, it was another set of masks, a mask that became for us a way to discuss identity fundamentally. How can you can transform the identity of people through the object of the mask? And then in this case, well, in the collagen mask that we saw before, we were investigating the idea of symbiosing and parasitism. Here instead, it's about protection. So how can we imagine technological extensions that somehow resemble transformations of the human body, which are meant to protect the body or suggest an idea of protection. So I think that really for us, modulating this different type of feelings that the images can provoke was one of the major points. So we're very interested as designers in how the objects are shaped and made, but also the type of feelings that the object can provoke in a viewer and in a wearer of this product. So one design of the carapace mask, the carapace Vidian mask, was focused on the front part of the face and of the body, while we also had another one that was instead focusing on the side of the body. So trying to understand how the head can be transformed in a way that is making, that is alien to the body, how we understand it, how slight changes in the shape can transform quite radically the image and suggest something beyond the man as we know it. So the superabundance mask, it's again working with fibers. Here we were interested instead in how more in depth than in the collagen, how really fibers can be organized as tissues, and tissues that can be controlled in terms of density, orientation of the fibers, gradients within the tissue. And so we were looking a lot at microscope images like this one and try to understand how those can be simulated. So we were working with a slightly different algorithm, shortest walk in this case, which is basically a way to find connections onto a grid, and then applying that algorithm to different grids and to just simply increasing the complexity of the drawing. So if you were to have hundreds of thousands of fibers on a very dense grid, you would start getting this type of patterns. And we were interested because then it's really about working with a tissue where you don't control the shape of a single fiber, but rather it's really about controlling the system as a whole. And this has a very post-natural look to it. It is something that reminds of a natural formation because of the fact that some of the connections look quite organic, but at the same time, there is also the element of the grid, which is kind of an abstract reference into the image, much more artificial in its look than organic. So in a way, we were also interested in seeing how we can modulate the code behind the simulation to achieve different type of effects in the fibrous system, and then eventually relate it to 3D printing and start to work with these 3D printed tissues where you can read gradients of density and then of light and then of permeability and so on. So eventually also this mask engages with the idea of parasitism and symbiosis, but in a much more radical and aggressive way than the collagen mask. So here the tissue is overriding the features of the face, while in the other mask you could still catch the gaze of the viewer, look at some details, whether the mouth or the nose or the ears. Here really the fibrous system is overriding completely the face, creating a very different type of feeling. So these are pictures of the 3D printed parts, and then that's it's less developed, this one, the accretion mask, but still I think it gives an idea of the type of the array of possibilities of this type of artistic practice also can support. So here we were interested in the idea of again growth onto a substrate, and how also many simple granular elements can come together in more complex assemblages. And then eventually create a relationship with the body, which is, I believe, even more aggressive than the other ones that we had before. So often in our project, we are interested also in investigating feelings such as the uncanny, or the fact that something there is a restlessness in the image, or something which is troubling more than comforting. So that's also the fact that we're interested in understanding what happens once you start pushing outside of the comfort zone and produce different kind of feelings. So if what we saw so far was the part of our work which is most artistic, I believe, then this type of research started reverberating on a number of other projects with different degrees of actualization or also commercialization in another way. So we started engaging soon after the first mask with projects dealing with prosthetics and medical products. Try to understand how you can transform a medical product by including a different set of values, such as beauty. Generally, medical products are designed with a very functional vision in mind and exclusive functionality in itself, but we were interested in thinking how elements such as beauty and aesthetics and visual language and the discourse about identity can be included in a medical product. So how can the identity of a person who lost a leg can be rethought and transformed, and how that can become a new space for expression beyond being a stigma of something that is missing. So this project stayed at a very conceptual level, but then we were able to go much more in depth into the orthosis project, the generative orthosis project, where we were looking at orthotics. So orthoses are devices that you are meant to use continuously in certain chronic diseases to stabilize parts of the body. And so we were approaching this project, the idea was to have at the same time work on an increased functionality based on the 3D scanning of the body, so the device is completely customized onto the shape of the body, and also to explore the possibilities in terms of functionalities of digital design. So what if you start including a pattern that is allowing the device to be permeable to air and water, and so it's the comfort while wearing it is stronger, and at the same time introduce an element of aesthetics into the device, an element of beauty, an element of visual language into that. And I think our intention in this type of project was to really work on both levels at the same time and rethink the medical product. So what we're seeing here is instead a different one. This is a leg orthosis, and much of the work here was on the joint to try to modulate the flexibility of the device while having a very simple dynamic shape to that. Another project, this is a collaboration with Andrea Morgante of Shiro Studio. It's in fact a walking stick, which I believe was meant to be the first 3D printed walking stick. And so the speculation behind this project is that the walking stick can be thought as an external bone, something that extends your body, allowing you to move if you need that. And so as an external bone that was designed, so you know that bones are very characteristic by the fact that if you look them from the outside, they have an incredibly smooth and clean shape, but in the inside they have a very articulated structure. So there is inside the bone this trabecular structure which is changing in density according to the loads which under which the bone is subject. So basically the structure is denser where there are more loads, and is less dense where there are less loads, and that's also the reason why the bones are relatively light. And so to tackle that, we work with the same simulation that we were working in the Carapace project, and working also in collaboration with Aru and in Centrale. The idea was to actually, subject to a stress simulation, the 3D model of the walking stick, and then arrange the densities of the tissue accordingly. So eventually the tissue is denser where the loads are higher, and less dense where the loads are lower. And so also this one was a way to rethink the medical device, to try to make it into a design statement and something that is allowing to rethink also identity. So just showing something, as I mentioned before, I'm responsible for computational design at Zaha Hadid Design, and among all the projects that I've been working there, I will just show you the ones which are relevant for this line of discussion, which is fundamentally a collaboration between Zaha Hadid Design and Odlo. So here we work on a number of garments. Odlo, if you don't know the brand, they mostly work on sportswear and winter sports specifically, and garments such as base layers for skiing and cycling and running. So this project specifically, the first one I'm showing, it's about a base layer and how a base layer which is knitted. So the technology here is not 3D printing anymore, but it's automated knitting. And what we were working with is how can you control the patterns in the network, in the knitwear, computationally, and relate them to maps of performance. So we were working with multiple yarns in this project. Every yarn is a different color in the image, so it's not printed. It's the color is not printed. The color is in the yarn itself, and the yarns have different thermal properties. So basically, by intertwining them with a complex pattern, you can eventually modulate the thermal behavior of the garment in different parts of the body. So the pattern was then meant to articulate at the same time a visual language and change the performance of the garment in different parts of the body according to sweat maps and thermal behavior. So in the areas where you need more thermal support, there will be more of the yarn that is warmer, and vice versa, where you need to cool the part of the body more, then there would be less warm yarns. And then the collaboration then spread to many other pieces. So one interesting was this activewear collection, where we were looking at, again, how you can work with the knitwear to have gradients in the permeability of the garment. So the holes here are not cut. They come from how the knitwear is arranged. And then the idea is that you can let the body breathe in the areas where it can breathe. And then how the design can then become distinguished by these continuous patterns. So I'm about to wrap up, just showing the last few things. So if that line of discussion was from artistic vision to more and more actualized projects, I'm going to close again with more artistic recent research that I've been carrying on. So the first one is about erosion. So I've been fascinated for a long time by the patterns that erosion is carving onto the earth, onto the rocks that form the surface of our planet, and how that can be expressed into design. So in a way, I was intrigued by the idea, how can you interpret digitally a process of erosion? So I started working with different types of simulation. First of all, with image processing algorithms. This is a relatively common image processing algorithm named pixel sorting. And I was intrigued by the fact that you can start crafting images where they really look like eroded patterns. So, but it's an eroded pattern, which at the same time reminds of natural formation, but it has a very distinctive digital feel to that. It's the fact that you can really read the pixel. And so it's definitely a digital image at the same time. So basically, the working process was to work with images as database, datascapes, and transform them with this image processing algorithm, creating a kind of digital erosion. And again, post-natural in the sense that is, I believe, hybridizing the space between what we think of natural and artificial, and physical and digital, in this digital form of erosion. So I explored the design space with a number of images, engaging with this subject, and eventually starting seeing how that can be turned into three-dimensional shape, and then how that can become a design technique for architectural patterns. The last expression of that was starting to work again with 3D printing, and then thinking of an eroded head. So in this case, I was intrigued by the idea of applying to the human figure a process of erosion, a process of transformation that in fact comes to also go beyond the erosion itself, but suggests speed, suggests transformation. So in a way, an important part of my work is also to try to rethink how the human figure and the human body can be rethought through new ways of representing it, through way of processing it with design tools and artistic methodologies and visual sensibilities. So the thing which came quite unexpectedly, but I believe is point of strength of this object is that it's really different from any point of view, and it's quite fascinating to catch the different patterns that. So the front side is really different from the back, and it's very different from the sides. And then the last project which I'm going to show, it's a collaboration with Vincenzo Reale, Stratasys, and Creative Region Linth, and EMPA, and Haratech. The project is named Thalassic, and we were exploring here the potential of 3D printing on fabric for the design of a protective mask. So as we all know, we live in a time in which protective masks are devices which are needed every day. And the ambition of the project was to try to rethink it. So while we on every day keep using surgical mask, medical mask, again, how can we rethink the medical product to incorporate values such as beauty and become a design statement which is showing a new form of identity. So in this sense, the project was quite bold, really pushing on the idea of the identity and tried to rethink the protective mask in a much radical way. So the masks are 3D printed on fabric. The fabric is chiffon fabric, so you can see through. And the different patterns are inspired, as the name said, thalassic by formation, oceanic formation that you can find in deep water, such as corals, anemones, and jellyfishes, and generally how all these natural forms feed themselves by acting as filters of the water, and then how they can extract nutrients by filtering water. The idea here is that they act as filters, like protecting the body instead from all the things that we know may be aggressive. So the discourse goes, I believe, beyond COVID, but in a way it addresses the world that is changing. And unfortunately, we can imagine that environments may tend to become more and more aggressive. So generally, we will need to rethink the type of wearable products and devices that we use to extend our bodies and mediate the human with the world. I'm at the end, so thank you very much. Sorry, I think I was a bit long. Anyway, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Filippo. Actually, very intriguing presentation. Thank you again. And I like this idea of going beyond the dichotomies. That is also, I mean, the main, the theme now that is connecting all those interventions, and also this fluidity. And we're going to talk about that later. I would jump to Andrea's presentation right now, so we can. Andrea, can you share your?
Yes, I can.
Screen? Thank you very much.
So yes. Filippo, amazing presentation, just to say, really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's do it. So I will present myself briefly. I am Andrea. I'm from São Paulo, Brazil, and I have a bachelor in architecture, but I did a lot of masters in Barcelona, Italy, about biodigital design, and now I'm doing a PhD in Shanghai that is called Digital Futures. And also I'm teaching at the IDI together with Mirko and Gionata. I opened the studio in 2010 that is focused on the study of nature and new technologies. But today I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to have more kind of philosophical thoughts about my research, my recent research and my PhD. So my talk is called Invisible Presences. It's going to be quite theoretical because I want to discuss about the body in a kind of using neuroscience to do that. I think neuroscience is unlocking a lot of possibilities because we have some theories from psychoanalysis and also phenomenology that are being scientifically proven nowadays. So it's a really good period to study neuroscience and to better understand, for instance, about the biological basis of learning, memory, feeling, emotion, behavior, perception, and consciousness. So our nervous system metabolizes reality in three ways: through sensory apparatus, through feeling, and cognitive, through thinking. I'm going to mainly talk about feeling, and for that, feeling has been discussed a lot of, in a lot of years, but I'm going to use Antonio Damasio, that is a neuroscientist and is a professor at the University of Southern California. He is one of the pioneers of effective neuroscience, so I'm going to use his work as a base to develop this idea about the body. And his work is basically based on homeostasis. So what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the regulation of the body states through negative feedback to maintain conditions compatible with life, providing well-being. So for instance, when it's hot and we sweat is a kind of negative feedback to maintain temperature in our body. And we do that without conscience. But there are some kind of homeostatic elements that we do consciously. For instance, we eat when you're hungry, or we drink if you're thirsty. So he developed this theory based on the fact that feelings is an information sent back to the system to improve its performance. So it's a kind of optimal mean. And the history of living organisms, and here I'm going to base this research on his book called Feeling and Knowing. So the history of living organisms has taken 3 distinct and consecutive evolutionary stages. The first one is hallmarked by being, the second one by feeling, and the third one by knowing. So I'm going to start with the first one, that is being. And with that is the capacity of sensing. Sensing is the same as detecting, is different than perceiving that you have to have a conscience. Sensing is the most elementary variety of cognition. So for instance, bacteria, plants, they can detect temperature or acidity, and they can respond intelligently to what they sense through a kind of discrete movements. And they act in accordance to the rules of homeostasis. So they have a kind of non-explicit explicit competence, that is, they don't know why or how they do what they do. They just do it by homeostasis. The second one, going further, is minding. So minding requires a nervous system and the creation of representations and images. So mental images, they flow in time and they are open to manipulation and generation of novel images. And these open ways to have, for us to have feelings and consciousness. So what are feelings? Feelings, they arise in the interior of our organisms, in the depth of our viscera. So with our immune and circulatory systems. So all the systems that are in charge of metabolism and defense. And then the feelings, they divide here into 2 categories. Damasio, right? Homeostatic feelings, that is related to well-being. So for instance, if you're flourishing in life, it means that you're balanced and that you have, because of that, you are thriving in life and you have well-being. On the other hand, failure at the life management effort is translated as discomfort or pain, something like that. And besides homeostatic feelings, we have another type that is the emotional feelings. So it's our emotive reactions that we have that are weak or strong, like fear, joy, and etc. So we have these 2 categories, and we start with the homeostatic feelings, and these other emotional feelings are building into a loop through that and making our reality. That leads to consciousness. So consciousness is, as Damasio puts, the rearrangement of the furniture of mind, not the fabrication of the individual pieces. So it means the whole system together, right? As it's a system level phenomenon. So in consciousness is really important, the sense of ownership that we have. So the mind belongs to a particular organism. So I am here in this space right now with all these conditions. So this is the sense of organism. It's not you that are here, it's me with all my baggage, my background, my feelings, etc. And consciousness, according to Anil Seth, and this is a talk that I highly recommend on TED, that he divides consciousness for this purpose in a world and self. So the consciousness that we have of the world is, imagine the brain as, for instance, locked in a black box trying to figure out what is out there in the world, right? So the brain acts as a prediction engine. And perception, that means figuring out what is there, has to be a process of informed guesswork because the brain is not sure. So the brain combines the sensory signals with our prior expectations and beliefs, the way the world is, to form this best guess. And we have that studied in not just a lot of theories such as Gestalt, but in neuroscience, in cognitive science, a lot of fields that are evolving and having this kind of studies. So it's really certain that stimuli is different than our percepts. For instance, this card, we see the first one as being red, the second one as being green, and so on and so forth. But actually, they have all the same color. They are all gray. But we do that because our brain uses the information of the light that the car is receiving, not just in one point, but in the whole scene. So this is the image that I took from an MIT course on cognitive science that is really interesting as well. And we do that with a lot of things. So the stimulus is always different than our percepts. I'm not going to here enter in a lot of depthness, but it's interesting for us to know what is our limitations of how we perceive things and how we receive things, right? Related to spaces, seeing color, geometries, everything. So perception doesn't depend largely, and that's a really nice thing about Daniel-Saf that he says, on the signals coming from into the brain from the outside world. It depends more, as much or if not more, on the predictions flowing on the opposite direction. That means that actually we are always thinking about perception of something going from outside, but mainly we have to invert this look and understand what is going out from the inside. So he says, we not passively perceive the world, we actively generate it. The world that we experience comes as much, if not more, from the inside out as from the outside in. So he calls perception as a controlled hallucinations. And it's really interesting because we don't do that just with the outside world, but we do that within ourselves. So the perception that we have of ourselves is the same inference that we have from the outside world. So for instance, the brain generates the experience of being a body or having a body by making its best guess about what is or isn't part of the body. So for instance, this is an experiment that they did that is called rubber hand illusion. So what they do is they hide your real hand through a kind of cardboard, and they put a fake hand in front of you. So you're there staring to the fake hand. And they start to stroke both hands at the same time. And there at a point, a guy comes here and stabs the fake hand, and the person takes out his real hand. So that means that the congruence between seeing and touching and feeling touch of an object that looks like a hand and stands in the same place as for instance, our own hand is enough for the brain to make the best guess that the fake hand is part of our body. So even experiences of what the body is a best guess. So it's a kind of controlled hallucination. And there we can try to understand that better because, for instance, here we have a type of disorders that people can have in their body regarding their body. And there is one, for instance, phantom limb, in which a person that doesn't have a limb, doesn't have a leg or something like that, feels pain in the leg that he doesn't have. And you have the opposite. You have people that have the leg, but doesn't acknowledge that this leg is his leg. So what is the boundary of our body, you know? And there's something called interoception, that are sensory signals coming from the inside of the body. So this kind of sensory signal from the viscera. So how the heart is doing, the blood pressure, etc. And perception of regulation of the body's internal state are what keep us alive. That means is the homeostasis. So what I'm perceiving from my body now, my heart rate, my breathing, it's all related to homeostasis, right? So our conscious experience depends on sensory signals from deep inside the body. We experience the world in ourselves with, through, and because of our living bodies. So our experience of being an embodied self are more about controlling hallucinations than figuring out what is there. And there is an experiment that Daniel talks about as well, that is the rubber band experiment, but in a virtual reality. So he puts a virtual hand that changes colors from red and back in time and out time with people's heart rate. So you sit in front of the computer and you see your virtual hand there. But when the heartbeat is in time, people have a stronger sense that is part of their body. So we can see here that the experiences of having a body are deeply grounded in perceiving your body from within. So what the body adds to the nervous system? It adds biological intelligence, the homeostasis, that it eventually is expressed in the form of feelings. And what the nervous system adds to the body? So the construction of the spatial patterns that constitute images and the possibility of making knowledge explicit. So it enables reflection, planning, reason, and the generation of ideas. And here the Mazio extend to the generation of cultures, and all our artifacts and creation comes from there. But if we pick the line of the evolution, we can see that from the first cells until now, we have one thing in common with this really simple kind of first organism. That is, we all have homeostasis. That can be unconscious, for instance, like the trees that I showed, or can be regulated by a nervous system, as we are. We have actually both of them. We have the unconscious one, and we have the one that are conscientious. And going back to the idea of the tree, it's really interesting because the trees, I saw one time an installation in Triennale, The Broken Nature, and it said that when you have a forest of oak trees, the oak tree that is growing up, that is beginning, usually they can't do photosynthesis because the forest is really dense. So what the older oak trees, they do is they grow the roots in direction to the new tree to supply nutrients until this new tree can do photosynthesis by itself. So it's a kind of homeostatic, collective homeostatic that is really interesting and make us reflect about our body. So is it our body, or we can say bodies, or what is the limit of our body, as Andy Clark puts about extending mind? So do we have an extended body as well? Or the conjunction of bodies. So here you have this interaction between bodies, right? And when we look to that kind of line of thought, we understand that homeostasis can be done within the self, with other people, but also with the environment. So Jane Lovelock has this idea as Earth as a self-regulating entity that is quite interesting. So the regulation is something that binds us all, from non-humans to humans. And it's really clear because, for instance, in Japan, they have something that is quite interesting that is called forest bathing. So people go to the forest and relax and have a stroll in the forest. And the contact with the trees is really important because the trees, they they release oil that makes, for instance, that makes our blood pressure decrease, our heart rate decrease, boosts our autoimmune system. So this interaction between nature and us, it's really, really important. We see that a lot of biophilic design, and now is also being scientifically proven. And also with animals. This is a picture of my dog in the beach house, and they studied nowadays how dog owners have a lower blood pressure because touch is really important. So when you stroke and when you enter in contact with an animal, he relaxes, and you too, a lot of substances are released in your body. And also between ourselves, for instance, when a friend is sad and you try to talk to your friend, you're trying to propose a homeostatic balance because you're trying to cheer up your friend. So Lisa Barrett, that is a neuroscientist from Northwestern University, she said a lot, we evolved to be social animals. That means that we regulate each other's nervous system, both for the better and for the worse. So it's a survival strategy to spend less energy. So our brain is divided into a lot of brains, right? And Yousef said something that is really nice. And when we agree in our hallucination, we call it a reality. So for instance, and Lisa Barrett also talks about that. For instance, our ability to agree of what something means is really important. So money, what is money throughout the culture? Money is something that we agreed that everyone is going to use. So we feel really good because we are part of a culture that we understand. And she even tells that in some cultures that the concept, for instance, of sadness that doesn't exist, they don't feel sad. So it's actually is like that. Reality is agreed hallucination. And thinking about all of that, now I want to ask, so how design could be utilized as a performative strategy for homeostasis, providing negative feedback to generate balance within us? This is the work that is a student from the IDI is doing, and she analyzed that our color preference changed throughout age. So we start as baby looking black and we go to red. And then when we are elderly, for instance, and when we are children, we prefer bright colors, primary colors. And when we are elderly, we don't see so much green and blues because our eye becomes yellowish. So what about having a space, and here is a theoretical question, that changes color, so your perception changes and you can see better and you can feel better in a space according to your own capabilities, you know, how a space can serve as a homeostatic environment. And this idea of pairing as well that we saw, with the regulating the human brains regulating each other. So for instance, can I don't know why, I'm sorry. So here is a video. Can I think about a project that pairs with me? So if my breathing is accelerated, it pairs up with me. So I have a kind of connection as the virtual hand, and then slows down. So my breathing is slowing down. So does any project, virtual, real, have this potential? And this is a project that a student is doing, is a multi-sensory installation that starts with VR, and now he's doing an installation on the metaverse that starts with that question. Are you calm or aroused? If you're calm, the installation starts with a calm kind of setting and it excites you. And if you're excited, it pairs you up with a kind of excited scenario and calms you down. And this opens a question that is, it poses the computer as a metaphysical stabilizers rather than a tool. So can we do that? And can we think about the body outside of ourselves. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Very inspiring lecture, incredibly interesting, and I think that you brought a lot of topics that to enrich the discussion a lot, especially about this idea of you know, this is really intriguing. You know, this idea of object, you know, that, or us as designer, can we think really of object as agents, you know, that can balance ourselves? I mean, and that so to think about the exchanges between the bodies, and okay, so thank you a lot, and I'm really looking forward for the discussion after the last presentation. So I welcome on the stage Gionata for the last.
Hello.
Okay. Hi, Gionata.
Can you see me? Hi.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mirko, and thanks a lot, Andrea. And sorry, I have I don't remember the name of the first presenter. Sorry, that's a very big
Filippo.
Yeah, Filippo, sorry. I had it in my mouth, but I couldn't
no
remember.
worries at all.
Sorry, really sorry. No, it was really amazing, both presentations. So really enjoyed listening to your perspectives in different ways. So I think I'm gonna maybe do a bit of both, a bit of theory and show you one project, because I only choose one, and I hope to guide you in within that project as in depth as I can. 1 second, let me just share the screen. Okay, now let's see if this works. Okay, do you see the full screen or the presenter view?
The screen.
The full screen.
Full screen.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'm going to talk about something I made up for this lecture today, which I call multi-species metabolic bodies. Before starting, I just like to spend a couple of words about myself quickly. So I'm an Italian designer. I live and work between Italy, the UAE, and the Netherlands. And I got my bachelor degree in industrial design from the University of Architecture of Venice, and then my master degree at the Design Academy in Eindhoven in 2009. And straight after that, I opened a design studio in the Netherlands, while at the same time I was doing while I was doing studio work, I also started a PhD at the University of Loughborough, which I completed in 2019 with a thesis on multi-species design, which is, by the way, what I'm going to talk to you about in a couple of minutes. So the most important aspect of my work are fundamentally, I would say, continuous experimentation with materials and production processes mediated by the use of emerging technologies. And usually my work emerges as a result of participatory and speculative design methods, breeding a kind of territory of synergy, of transdisciplinary synergy between disciplines, mostly biology and sociology, I would say. So from the active research phase, I try to derive artifacts and installations that work as perceptual bridges towards speculative future or speculative future scenarios. So in 2019, I joined the IDI with Mirko and same school of Mirko and Andrea to teach and curate the curriculum of product design. So one of my recent interests, my recent focus as a designer is the notion of multi-species encounter and interaction. And my objective here is to explore the role and also the position of non-human others within design and the design process. So when we design things, well, almost anything really, our interlocutors are usually people, and most of the design methods that we use are tailored around this sort of forma mentis. The human is basically positioned at the center of the design process. So in my work, I try to explore what happens when participants are biologically different others, or simply don't communicate through, let's say, normative human methods, like, for example, gestural or verbal methods. And when I talk about multi-species interaction or encounter, I don't necessarily imply that there should be a reciprocity in communication between us, people, humans, and other species. But I see the encounter as a sort of human movement towards others, those others, in order to trigger a sense of curiosity and maybe also new understandings of different ways of being and acting in the world. So multi-species design involves experimenting, or at least for me, it involves experimenting with environmental methods and tactics also that can let us to listen to other than human voices and letting those voices permeate the entire design process. So although, you know, this is I say it's a recent interest, is not really that recent, right? As you can see, while I was little, trees were always been very fascinating to me, and I used to love being sat on the branches of trees. Then I learned to climb trees, and then when I became older, of course, I really enjoyed just the pleasure of observing plants. Of course, smoking my pipe all the time. Anyway, trees were a really true fascination to me, and in this presentation, therefore, we talk about plants. We talk about vegetal bodies. With a focus on metabolism as a conceptual lens. So the idea is that looking at metabolism in a way can help us to explore how human and plant processes are deeply intertwined and also made through synergistic efforts. So obviously, this asks us to interpret metabolism through more than biological lenses, I would say. So if on the one hand, we are used to think about metabolism as this set of biochemical activities and processes that support life of any living organism, the term metabolism can also be used as a paradigm to account for social mechanism. So for instance, we can talk about social metabolism or even urban metabolism, which looks, for example, at the flows of material and energy in cities and more urban settings. So one interesting aspect of metabolism is, in my opinion, linked to its reading as a series of performative intra-species processes. So Monica Bacche, a philosopher, introduced the concept of metabolic network as a way of discussing the links that exist between plants and minerals. So in doing this, Bacche tries to provide a geological rather than biological reading of vegetal metabolism. And this serves her as a lens to analyze vegetal agency, so the agency of plants, from a relational stance which transcends time and even space. So as you might understand, this way of reading what you, Mirko, called the body in the brief of this roundtable today, departs from the idea of body as something that is just shaped or acted upon by society in a sort of passive manner. Instead, it kind of acknowledges that in the making of bodies, it is involved a deep sense of reciprocity, which is what forms those bodies, which is also what rules any sort of evolutionary and also sociocultural process. So nature culture is one word which is used often to acknowledge the togetherness of natural and cultural bodies and the inseparability of those bodies in ecological relationships. So the concept was brought forward for the first time by Augustin Fuentes and then Donna Haraway, and it foresees that nowadays we should talk about nature as a biosocial entity, meaning something that is formed both biologically and socially. So today we talk about one project that I developed with a dear friend of mine called Giovanni Nella. The project is called Geomerce. Maybe some of you have already seen it because I presented it several times. But this project basically revolves around one plant species, and it's a type of plants called hyperaccumulators, which are a particular kind of plant species which are known within the natural sciences for their ability to absorb heavy metals from polluted soil and also accumulate those metals from the roots to the tissues and the leaves. Then this metal can then be extracted by harvesting the leaf and burning the biomass. And this process is called phytomining. So for me, the interesting question here was, how is a weed made? And in what sort of network and relational process is a weed entangled? And what futures might even a weed enact? So a weed, hyperaccumulators are usually considered weed, like unwanted grasses. But what can those grasses make? In what process are they involved? So these plants usually grow on post-industrial territories, which are very complex environments because the conversion is made very difficult by the presence of dangerous debris, dangerous contaminants. So usually cleaning those places is complex and expensive, especially in the case of contamination by heavy metals. So the soil must be excavated first, and then you need to treat it chemically ex situ, and then bring it back to this to the original place. And this process kind of formalizes the destiny of those territories, because either those areas are designated to the construction industry, which benefits, of course, from an increase in value of the land, or otherwise the land remain unused. And a contaminated site is also a socially constructed place because it is linked to process and materialities which are connected to the public perception of risk. Being invisible, of course, unless by means of laboratory analysis, toxic contaminants generate blasted landscapes that are emotionally difficult to digest, and also biases as well. So those territories are prevented from becoming actionable from a social viewpoint. And I would say that in reality, those landscapes are serving us on how can I say? We say piatto d'argento, like a silver platter, an opportunity to expand our knowledge, to explore new practices of landscape reevaluation, including, for example, the perspective of non-human species on the theme of contamination, for instance. So in Geomerce, the project that I'm presenting you today, we try to involve the perspective of those hyperaccumulating plants on the theme of contamination, environmental contamination, trying to understand how those weeds learn to inhabit the territory where they live, thanks to the presence of those heavy metals. So the interesting thing about why this plant, those plants is why they accumulate heavy metals. So biologists and plant scientists call it the fence hypothesis. So for instance, the plant that you see here is called Arabidopsis halleri. It accumulates zinc and cadmium, and by doing so, it makes its tissues toxic to external factors and external environments. So parasites and insects can't eat the leaf, otherwise they die. So this is the strategy of the plant to survive in those lands. In this picture, you see, for example, an experiment I did in the University of Parma, while working with these plants, where the plant on the left was planted on soil, on clean soil, while the plant on the right was planted on soil with zinc. So clearly, not only the plant survived the contaminated soil, but also preferred it because it grew better on those places. So we can say that the resilience of those plants is inextricably tied to the human debris, which are on the land, but also to the climate, to interaction with other species, and so on. So the fact that those plants need to metabolize heavy metals to live induces us to reflect about alternative meanings of the term contamination, because the way of living of this plant turns the contaminant from garbage to value, or in other terms, from waste to asset. And this intuition also helped us to initiate Geomerce, because most of the metal that are absorbed by those hyperaccumulating plants are also quoted on international financial markets. So we decided to explore the role of those species in a future multi-species scenario where contamination is not seen as an issue, but more as a resource. Geomerce is a design biology project done in collaboration with the University of Wageningen and designer Giovanni Nella, which is centered on the relationship between human and the vegetal worlds. And this is the story behind it. Can you hear the sound? Can you hear the sound?
No.
You cannot hear the sound.
No.
Now, yes.
For a long time, a factory has occupied this land. This factory produced parts for the motor, electronic, and clothing industry. The factory didn't survive the crisis and closed, leaving behind a land contaminated by heavy metals. People appropriated this land. Not aware of the past, they started growing vegetables. But the products of these fields weren't safe and couldn't be consumed or traded. The farmer realized that the metals in the soil represent a capital, a resource to exploit. Plants can extract those metals. From the roots, metals travel all the way to the leaves. Leaves can be harvested, burned, and the metals are so collected. This process is called phytomining. So the old technique of crop rotation was still used, but according to other criteria. At times, farmers follow the trends from finance. Using hyperaccumulators, extracting over 200 kilograms of heavy metals per hectare every year. Crossing breeds to create species with higher biomass and metal intake, resulting in new hyperaccumulators for precious metals. Slowly, we could move from a farm of metals to a wood of metals, or even a forest.
So this is the installation. I'm going to talk briefly about the different elements of it. So there are 3 hydroponic units that contain each a different hyperaccumulating plants that has roots immersed in a solution that dilutes heavy metals. So these solutions, in a way, simulate our polluted territories. So within the glass jar, as you see, there are 2 sensors that monitor in real time how much metal the plant extracts from the solution. Every 2 minutes, Geomerce calculates how much metal is absorbed by each group of plants. Then there is a brain, we call it a brain, a central brain, where there is an algorithm that associates the amount of metal extracted from the plant to the real-time quotation of that very metal in the financial market. These data are sent then to a series of plotters that tell about this possible future the video talked about, where agriculture blurs with economy, and farming decisions are in a way deriving from the collaborative action of plants, finance, and scientific progress. So the graph that you see on the right contains three main information. So there are vertical lines that describe every 2 minutes how much metal the plant took from the solution. There is this fragmented line that describe the value in real time every 2 minutes of the metal in the market. And then there is a figure. Well, that figure is important because it represents the speculative value of a hectare of contaminated land, assuming it was cultivated with hyperaccumulator plants. So after we built the project, we thought about how to circulate it. And in doing so, we use the technique of following the plant. That's how we call it. So our objective was that of maintaining the contaminated landscape at the center of our work, and at the same time interrogate the plant about the territory. We almost wanted to see the plant as a witness of the history of that territory. So in one of the last edition we received to exhibit the work, it was in 2018, in occasion of Bio25, the Biennale of Design in Ljubljana, in Slovenia. And here we explored the territory of an ex-mine at the boundaries between Slovenia and Austria. It was used until 1950 to extract lead and zinc. So the entire territory is still now full of heavy metals like cadmium, zinc, arsenic. And we wanted to understand more what sort of plants were inhabiting the land, their way of inhabiting it, and also their extraction capabilities. So we asked a biologist to help us in the process, and we started to look, so she brought us in this territory. We started to look around the former mine to understand if we could find any of those species. And here we are on the top of the valley that oversees the mine. So here, thanks to the experience of the biologist and to the walks we did in a week time, we managed to find this population of plants called Laspi precox, which is an ecotype that grows only in that specific area because of the lead and zinc, which is contained in the terrain after years of contamination. We took all the samples that we could, and we geotagged the samples to recognize where they came from. And then we brought them into the exhibition space, where they were placed into the hydroponic unit of Geomerce. After that, we started the installation, and the installation performed for 4 days. So this is day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4. So you see that after 4 days, the plant, this is like one group of plants, it uptook all the matter from the water solution. At the same time, we had a public debate where, beside the biologist, a couple of biologists, also many other people from society participated. They came to see the installation, and this was very interesting because I tried, what I was looking at was the kind of public that the project put together and assembled, the kind of public that assembled around the project. During the research process, I observed that these endemic species do not just act as witnesses of their environmental disturbances, and therefore do not just link histories of contamination that are otherwise distant, like temporally distant from each other. They are also engaged in many other kind of relationships. For instance, they act politically within metabolic networks that involve post-industrial sites, national and environmental policies, biologists, and even laboratory things like publications and lab equipment. And this mode of agency emerges relationally, we can say, because while growing on these territories of political disputation, each of those plant species enacts responses from national research institutions, which then aggregates biologists and lab equipment to identify opportunities to remediate a land. And this relationship then results in relational processes that transform the territory, because some of those sites were cleaned up, although not always using phytoremediation as a process. So this is one of the numbers that came out of the plotter during the installation that we presented. So I asked myself, in reality, if that number only represented this. And the answer I gave myself is that no, it doesn't, because this number for me means much more, because it tells about the result of a negotiation between vegetal and human processes. And this is a scheme where you see the methodological process that supported my research within this metabolic network. So as you see, the plant is in the center and is followed across 3 different sites: the contaminated territory, the laboratory, the scientific lab, and the showroom, the exhibition space. So a couple of conclusions that I wanted to use to end this presentation. So the first is that I like to think about design as a performative multi-species act, where multiple bodies are constantly reframed as the result of human and other than human efforts. And the other conclusion is also very important, is that multi-species design aims at creating these occasions of encounter, which are intended as experiences experiences that allow us to appreciate other than human viewpoints. And I want to make 2 last precisations here, 2 last points here. The first concerns the theme of the encounter, that I see as a practice which is unanticipated and unpredictable, that guide us towards the plant, that guide us towards the organ of the plants, that guide us to dig the soil, to dialogue with the inhabitants that constitute the life of these plants. In a way, we could say that following the plant means also encountering the plant. The second thing concerns the term multi-species design, because often people ask me, what does that mean? And here I don't mean to design for other species, right? But with those species who inhabit our territories. And this for me implies distancing ourselves as as humans from this kind of epic perspective, or like also heroic and in a way like very masculine perspective that tell about the designer as the savior of the planet, to move us instead towards a dimension which is more participatory. So I end this presentation with this picture, which is the picture I show also at the beginning, where you can see the spore and the filaments of a mycorrhiza that grows around the root of a plant. Often in nature, metabolism is symbiotic, but this does not mean that there is only cooperation existing. Sometimes relationships also involve conflict and even competition. For instance, a contaminated territory is a place where, although there is a lot of friction, evolution keeps happening. And Lee Margolin argues that life on planet has evolved from through a coherent form of collaboration and competition, and that life did not take over the world by combat, but by networking. And I fully share this perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gionata. Very, very inspiring and thoughtful presentation about, the topics that we're discussing today. Thank you again. And actually, I was intrigued by this idea of, making bodies is actually about reciprocity. It's something, that I feel that is a kind of a leitmotiv between these, between you 3, in the sense that, and also this idea, of going. So I start with what you said, that you're trying to go beyond this idea of contamination or pollution as contamination that has this negative connotation, that doesn't take into account the balances, as if we want to connect with what Andrea was talking about also before, that it's actually about how bodies are interacting to each other to balance themselves also. And also to what, I don't know if, but I would say the rebalance that Filippo talked about with these, let's say, new identities that are creating by the combination of bodies, in the sense that, for instance, let's say, Filippo, you can obviously respond to that, but what I perceive is that, you know, it's always when you a combination of the human body and your masks, for instance, to create new identities and a transformation of the two things, you know, to recreate a new state. And this again, I would say it's a kind of a leitmotif that is connecting, from my perspective, your work. I mean, the work of the three of you. So if you allow me, design for we can say it's a kind of a modulator of this other bodies interactions. So what do you think about that? Maybe we can also start a conversation about, or start with this this point. So what is also the role of a designer, in such a framework, in terms of what are the things now to take in considerations when we have to face these new interactions, And I think that now we can freely, let's say, discuss about what you presented, guys. So I think that if you want to intervene directly, Andrea, Gionata, and Filippo, and also in relations with what I mean the other lecturer presented, we're open to do it. And I think that the stimuli are here, no?
Mm.
Mirko, so I will start. I think there is something about what you said about things to take in consideration in multi-species design. And I feel that, for instance, that's something that is connected to what Gionata said, in a way, Filippo as well, with the roots and everything, is that species have to thrive. So I would start by there. So what is the situation that in a relationship, these species, they somehow thrive, or whatever it takes to generate a kind of balance between them, Mm. So for me, this is really interesting.
And it's also about, I really like what you mentioned before, related to the boundary of the body, the question, what is the boundary of the body? That is also something that, for us as designer, I put myself now in this, let's say, side now, when we design something, we tend to create an envelope, a kind of a boundary, something that has specific, I would say, limitations in terms of the configuration and so on. But actually, we're not talking only about that. I mean, in the sense that that is just a kind of an interface to something else in terms of, again, this transformation into through the interaction between the bodies. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. What is the body? Or should we say one body to everything? Or should we say about, should we think about bodies, separate bodies, right? It's interesting, this kind of dialogue. Because if you think about one body that holds everything, then what Gionata is saying, it's really interesting, because you can have this kind of symbiosis that you have in nature that sometimes is prejudicial, but in general, everything thrives, but maybe one species die. But it's a balance, everything is in balance. Or if you see a separate bodies in which the species that you're designing, they all have to thrive. It's something to think about.
I think no, that's a super interesting point. And I kind of regret not having shown some of the work that also we've been doing at the Bartlett in the last years, because I think the interaction with different species was a bit more explicit there. Anyway, I think it's, I like to bring up an author, which is Arthur C. Clarke, not Arthur C. Clarke, sorry. It's there's a book, Natural Born Cyborgs. which I think it makes a very good point in the fact highlighting that we have a very conservative and monadic view of our bodies. So the body as something enclosed and defined, and the human body as separate from everything else. While in fact, the human mind tends to create a prosthetic relationship with technology, which acts much more in depth than how we generally think. Like, for instance, the fact that we use pen and paper to think, to express thought, means that the mind is extending itself by the use of that specific technology. And so what I would like to say is that when we start thinking of protocols of communication and collaborations with other species, we enter, in fact, a territory where the possibilities of the human in the relationship with other species are much wider than we generally think. So I believe that in a way, working with plants in a certain way, it's also a way to investigate how we can create a symbiotic relationship with external entity, which goes much deeper than we would expect. And in a way, it's also some of the ideas behind the project that I was showing the fact that how the human body can be reframed by the interaction with technology. So the mask becomes a way to transform the body and rethink the way we are. So moving forward, I think that a very interesting point to discuss, and maybe it's also a question for the other speakers and for everyone, is how would you imagine structuring a protocol of communication with other bodies? And what are your expectations for that? And which are the values? How do you think that this type of communication can happen? That's also a question. Like
yeah, and also thinking about the possibility of misunderstanding and you know, error generation and all these things now that are plausible and possible. So yeah.
Yeah, there is I think it's super interesting. I mean, I don't know if you've seen recently. I mean, it's not a movie that was produced recently, but Solaris by Tarkovsky. Which is really about how human, like summarizing the plot for the ones that maybe don't know it, is basically about humans on a spacecraft observing a planet where there is an ocean, and they have the idea that such ocean is alive. And the whole movie is about interacting with this ocean and trying to understand what the ocean is. Is there a form of intelligence? Is there a form of consciousness? Can we establish communication with that entity? And then the movie goes in that. At a certain point, there is also realizing a failure in the communication with external entity. But so I also wonder, when you work with plants, for instance, or with other entities, how would you imagine the communication to happen? If there is
that's a tricky one. Can I
Sure.
intervene? Because I think like we're still in a way relying on this idea of agency as a process that assumes intentionality, but also like language use, movement, right? And even like a centralized idea of the brain. So the brain as an organ that is positioned or in a specific part of our body, and that we use to direct you know, the body function. And it's interesting here. I think the step that is necessary and maybe utopian at the same time, but important and necessary, is to find a way to extend you know, our or to get as close as possible to the boundaries of our perceptual universe as humans, and try to enter into this sort of contact zone with the perceptual universe, or what's called Umwelt, of different others, like be it plants or any other beings. And so one of the most, you know, for example, one of the things that I was interested in doing while I was doing my PhD, and the project I was showing today was my PhD work, is how do you interview a plant, for example? Can you interview a plant? Of course you can't, but maybe there is a way to go around it, for example, to use a spokesperson that can speak in behalf of that thing, that entity. So one of the things that I was doing was talking with biologists and asked them to speak as if they were the plant that they studied for like a couple of decades, for example. So borrowing the voice, so in a way it was almost like the scientist borrowing or lending the voice, so the plant lending the voice to the scientist so that the scientist could talk in her behalf. But I think that the tricky one, that is the bigger obstacle, is a verbal, like a non-verbal communication, and how do you interact with this sort of condition of being somehow, yeah.
I think it's nice, this idea to put in the place of others. And we show what Didi, for instance, that guy that acts like a goat to understand. Yeah. It's really funny. So he puts himself as a goat. I don't know, there isn't the internet, and he goes there and he interacts with other goats. So the first thing, if you change your point of view and your height, it changes a lot from there, you know? So this empathic kind of view, and to extend your perception that Gionata is talking about, and to understand better what is the other. For me, it's really important. And maybe we can't understand everything, but one thing we can understand, it's that I try to pose here today, is the homeostatic thing. So what is the basic element that a plant or whatever needs to thrive, you know, and from there, maybe doesn't have feelings or something like that, but we can understand the basic. And by understanding the basic, for me, it's a lot already, you know, trying to see what can I make for this element to thrive, what can I gain as well. So how to propose this kind of the relations. And it's not easy, because even with the human species, it's complicated, right? When we have people with different kind of perceptions or that have a little bit of disorders, it's hard to communicate with them. It's hard to understand how they think and what they need exactly. So with a non-living, non-human living, it's even harder, you know.
I believe also that perhaps we need to go, and I think this is a good plant language, back to the roots, because I feel also that modern life isolated us from understanding a lot of things which previously was very logic for human beings. And the words of Gionata also brought me to think in two things. For example, the plant is absorbing bad things in order to protect herself from others. We do this, for example, when we put a cream on our body to protect ourselves from mosquitoes, for example. No, we also make ourselves bad smelling and so on. So we have a similar attitude, if you want. Or body-body communication. I'm thinking about the role, the man and the dog, where the dog is a protector, and that is creating a kind of relation which is between species, and both of them benefit from each other. So actually, it is existing since long time, but because we're looking so much to technology, perhaps we do not, let's say, observe, which I think is a question of observation mainly, how actually these relations are already existing, and we don't interpret them in a way that we can work on them and develop them further. This could be also, it's a very interesting lecture for me today to look at this in this way also. And for Filippo, I suggest you to read the original book Solaris from Stanislav Lem.
It's
very beautiful.
It's
very
fantastic, isn't it?
Fantastic, yes, it is.
It's really,
yes.
it's it's incredible. There is the chapter when they describe all the theories at the beginning, how they start imagining what the ocean can be. It's incredible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, and also maybe another thing is about that. I mean, again, on this attempt to extend the perceptions of ourselves to try to enter, as John said, to this perceptual universe of the others. No, it's maybe a key could be what Filippo is doing, in a sense, is a transformation of the body, of our body, through technology, to access these realms. No, so to have the possibility to change our capacity to perceive in a way. Then the question is, connecting to Andrea's work or investigation, because we are building reality in or the projection of with the expectation of what the reality is and so on. So how to balance these two things? No, so how we can and how we can balance these two parts of the construction of this reality.
Yeah, one very important thing for me is also to try to blur the boundaries between what is technology, what is the body, what is the natural, in that sense, because I think we are used to very rigid categories for that. So technology, we tend to think of it only in a certain way, while technology can become something almost not distinguishable from nature. In a way, or really there is a wide space of exploration where things become blurred, especially with the latest advancement. If you start thinking of like synthetic biology and forms of bioengineering, and on the other hand, artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's really about, I think, also realizing that there is a really rich territory where things become ambiguous all of a sudden.
Yeah, also, for example, thinking about what we eat today, what of this is already natural today? I think we don't want even to know of how much industry and how much chemical and how much not original or synthetic we are eating actually. And yeah, also the vaccine, for example, is something where again we are trying to make friendship with a virus by putting this virus a little bit in ourselves in order, however, again, protect ourselves from the virus. I think this is strategies which are very, very important also for the survival. Beautiful, the idea of let's talk a biologist instead of a plant to, let's say, give it a voice. Sounds, of course, a little bit, how can I say, artificial. At the same time, it's most probably the only way. Unless you look at the plant and see that's green and it's growing, then most probably it's happy. Still, we don't know why.
Yeah, no, I think in a way, like I really like what Filippo was saying, and I think Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto is an excellent reading in that sense, because at least for me, it really it was interesting that reading, because it shows us how entangled we are in a way, and in a way how impossible it is to make distinctions and to think in dualistic or dichotomic terms, right? We can't say we are just human beings, because we are becoming with our technological constructs in a way. And when I was doing my PhD work, I was talking with a biologist about why a certain species was in that particular area, and she was telling me that miners that were working or mining ores in North Russia use brought non-autochthonous, non-endemic species in Central Europe through the sole of the boots that they were using while they were working. So in a way, plant seeds exert their own form of agentic forces using the boot as a technological construct as a way of moving towards other parts of the world. So again, like these things, this process happen all the time, whether we understand or acknowledge it or not. Like there is another very beautiful book that is written by this journalist called Michael Pollan, where he talks about 4 different species, plant species in this case, and how they use humans as a way of spreading all around the planet, like the apple, marijuana, the potato, and the tulip, as 4 species that use the human needs and human desires as a way of spreading around the world. And I believe really that all these processes that are often hidden to our eyes are really beyond and around us all the time. And I think design can provide an interesting lens sometimes to represent those invisibility or those hidden relationships somehow.
Yeah, they're the real dominators of the planet. It's a green planet.
Yeah.
The lockdown showed that, right, Mirko?
True.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And I would like to maybe open the discussion, or if there are questions from the audience, we can, turn on the microphones and listen for some.
Hi, can I intervene? Hi, everyone.
Sure.
Thanks for the speech. It was really interesting. And I've seen a lot of influences, at least many of your projects suggest me some references to the art world, where, for example, cyborg art with Stellark or Hiroto Ikeuchi. And it suggests that the boundaries between art and design are pretty blurred in this field, where speculative design is addressing topic from the future world, which will later be translated in an actual solution. And I find this really interesting. And I'd like to know what's your point of view on this when you are working on your projects, if you are focusing mainly on real futurable problems and trying to address them with innovative solution where technology may be far ahead, but can later translate in an actual solution to a specific problem.
I think that's a very good question. Like maybe I can start saying what's my view on that. Like for me, I struggle a lot with the distinction between design and art, because I always find myself somehow in the middle. And so now I'm at peace at that. But in time, I had a lot of struggle, like, well, what am I? Am I an artist? Am I a designer? What I'm doing? Shall I focus more on this? Shall I focus more on that? So, and I eventually came to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter. So in the end, it's about just defining the design brief or the brief of what you're doing, and every exploration that you will do will have a different balance between components. So there are certain projects that start with a very artistic direction, so to speak. It's just about crafting speculations. And other projects which start with a much more actualized design-oriented, even commercial direction, like some of the projects of the wearable that I was showing before. And at the same time, what I can say that for me it's really important to have both and to have the range between the two extremes to move. Because then I think you produce an ecosystem which is much more fertile than just focusing in one direction. At least for me, that's not by far not a general rule. But if I were to focus only on design commercial projects, after sometimes I would lose the traction. I would flatten down a lot what I'm doing. And on the other hand, I also need to see how a speculative project can then bring change in an actual product. So that's describes, I think, my approach on that.
Yeah, I think mine is the same. I think, and also, if you stop to think, like, knowledge is the combination of cognition and emotion, right? So for me, in every area that you have to have the both, because we experience it differently. So whatever your mind doesn't understand, your heart does, something like that. So it's really hard to separate in any profession, you know, and I think it's important to have this kind of manifestos projects. When I started the studio as well, I thought, but this is not commercial. But if you have a really a kind of experimental idea, per se, I think it's not going to be commercial. You can have like really the top of the creation and then you commercialize it, you know, but you have to, if you do a commercial, it's going to be here. So it's nice to transition between these steps, I think.
I think like for me, like I recently became interested in I would say like more process-oriented design, and that's I think what design shares a lot with art, especially recently. The concept of performance, performative act, things that change in time and space. So like I think the moment you you look into that. And for example, you're interested in using design as a way of as a research tool, then of course there are a lot of similarities with the art world, and I also don't make any distinction anymore. I think actually it's even better, and it will be even better when this separation will be over finally at a certain point. But yeah, yeah, that's my opinion. Like when I think use design to collect data instead of thinking about it as something that you can sell, changes a bit the perspective, perhaps a bit. So yeah, I still do, for example, commercial work, and I'm presenting a couple of projects at Furniture Fair this year in Milan, like also with the about plant-human cohabitation. But still, I think my heart now is really on processual thinking, perhaps like how can I learn myself about how can I learn myself during the process about other ways of being or living. So I almost use it perhaps as an autoethnographic tool and as a tool for exploring questions and so on. Yeah.
And also just complementing, I think theory of art is really interesting because it goes really deep. So the theoretical foundation of art is amazing. It really has a lot of things there to look around, you know. I think design is more recent, and it's yeah, I think you have amazing thing there.
It's also a way to try out without, you know, the risks, you know, of you know, in the sense that you can it can go wrong, you know, if there are no let's say all the limitations and boundaries when you let's say interact with a real issue, in a sense. You know, it's kind of self sustaining, you know, and so it's kind of a lab test, you know, so about something else, you know, something that then could be applied on a in our reality in a way. Thank you very much also, Alberto, for the question. Do we have other considerations, questions, or curiosities from the audience?
Mirko, I need to leave you because I have to go. Unfortunately, I cannot stay.
No problem. Thank you very much, Gionata.
But no, thank
I
you.
also think actually it is after 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
I think we can conclude. The presentations were really incredibly interesting, and I think we could still talk for hours. What do you think, Mirko?
Yeah, I think it's okay. We can consider it then. So
yeah, perhaps it's even a good idea to make it again one other time.
yeah, absolutely. So
excellent.
Thank you very much, Andrea, Filippo, and Gionata. It has been a pleasure and very intriguing discussion. So thank you again, and
thank you very much
talk to you soon.
Thank you, Mirko.
Thank you very much, and good luck for your work. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.